listening to Resist and Restore, a podcast from the Circle of Hope Pastors, where we're extending the table of our dialogue. I'm Jonny Rashid. I use he, him pronouns.
I'm Rachel Sensenig. I use she, her pronouns.
And I'm Julie Hoke. I use she, her pronouns.
I'm so glad that we're doing another show together, and I'm excited to offer it to you. Later on in this show, Julie will interview me, which is kind of a unusual switch of how things usually are. I like to do the interviews, but Julie's going to interview me because I have a book coming out called Jesus Takes a Side. I'll tell you more about that on the interview and towards the end of the podcast too. It's fun to be able to share this with you. I'm excited about that. But I have to admit, we're going to start the show with something that is decidedly less fun and really solemn and sad. There's been no shortage of bad news in the United States, but the last 2 weeks we witnessed, in some ways, the darkest aspects of humanity, the darkest aspects of our country, the most egregious sins that we collectively hold expressing themselves in the worst ways. We had a racist massacre in Buffalo. 10 people died or killed by a teenaged gunman in a grocery store. Older, elderly people, right? A deacon of a church, people that were just regular, ordinary citizens living in a black neighborhood in Buffalo. And targeted hate crime, right, with a white supremacist manifesto. There's no real conjecture here. We know what it was. And then yesterday, another 18-year-old gunman in Uvalde, Texas, entered a school in the classroom, killed 19 children. I believe they were third graders. And 2 teachers. And just witnessing that horror, I want it to break my heart again. I want to feel it. I can't be numb to it. And as pastors, as leaders, as Christians, I think we have a place where we can help people feel their grief and their pain fully and create a space for it, as opposed to numbing it and then resulting in despair and hopelessness. At least for me, feeling my suffering is the only way I can get out of it and actually have hope. So I wanted to ask y'all what you were thinking, how you reflected on it, what words you can offer us.
Well, my mind immediately went to the parents, as a parent myself, to think about sending my kids to school and them being murdered there and not coming home is unfathomable. So in both cases, I was thinking first about the loved ones who lost loved ones, the people who lost people, and just the finality of that and feeling that grief. And I was reading that the gun production in the United States has tripled since 2000. And so, mostly from handgun purchases. And so this obsession with weaponry and whoever's profiting off of this accessibility to weapons is, this is just insane. And I'm wondering with you, I know that we've been fighting legislation around this for years, but I'm here wondering with you all today, like how we can insert ourselves more to stop the suffering.
Yeah, like how many times does this have to happen? How many more mass hate crimes with white supremacy manifestos are gonna how many more school shootings? I was talking to my kid about this morning, and for all the questions that come up about who did it and why, I had to just say, we live in a country that has not regulated or made illegal accessibility to semi-automatic weapons. Like, how is it that people can purchase these things legally? Both shooters were 18 years old. Like, you know, I can't even wrap my mind around that, first of all. And I wonder what argument or tragedy has to happen for us to wake up collectively and say, this has to stop. We have the power to intervene and make this not put guns in the hands of one another. And yet I just was reading how, I think it was in New York Times maybe, that gun violence is the leading cause of death for children and teens in the U.S. now. As of 2020. For the last 60 years, it has been car accidents. And now gun violence is the leading cause of death for our children in the U.S. We have a collective responsibility for that.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. This is not just about individual rights.
We need 90% of the country supports background checks on guns. So it's not even an issue that we're particularly polarized over when we talk about polarization, right? A lot of people think that we should have more gun regulation. But legislation doesn't move in Washington when it comes to that. And there are moneyed interests that keep that from happening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's financial interests, there's lobby interests, you know, political interests. And, you know, it's really gross, right, to see, like, you witness these horrible things, but why isn't your heart moved? You know, when I hear thoughts and prayers without actions, I hear faith without works is dead. You know, do something. Put some action behind what you're saying. You know, it's not good enough to pray. We don't want your empty prayers. You know, you need to have a response. You know, and it's what's infuriating to me is there are people who say things like critical race theory is dangerous for our kids in schools. You know, but you know what's dangerous for our kids in schools? Guns. People killing them, you know? Like, I have a third grader. Like, that's horrifying, you know? And, like, this isn't... In this country, it isn't like lightning striking you. It just happens so much. Mm-hmm. So we're just bound to experience it. It's scary, you know? Mm-hmm. So, like, I think that basic gun control is good, but is important. But we also just need a spiritual... response, you know, to racism, to hatred, to violence, to these things that, these root causes, you know. Canada has more guns per capita than the United States. Like, more people, it's more likely for someone to own a gun in Canada than it is in the US. They don't have more guns than us because we have so many people, but there's a lot of hunters and so on and so forth. But they don't have mass shootings. Why are we the only place that has things like this that happen? Like, doesn't it feel like something's diseased?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In the air, in the water, there's something broken.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
I think it's because we're one of the biggest... Martin Luther King said we're one of the greatest purveyors of violence in the world. Mm-hmm. So what do you think the message is for our people? There's too much violence. There's too much celebration of it. Glorification of it. So something needs... We need healing from that.
You talked about the triplicate evils of racism, militarism, and capitalism, right?
That's right.
And these shootings seem like
a combination of all of them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A manifestation of all of them. Sorry.
Totally.
I interrupted you. Yeah. Yeah, and Jonny, I forget your prompt question at the beginning, but it was something about like, how are we processing this? Or I think one thing that I'm trying to practice is my grief. I think even in this conversation, we kind of jumped to action maybe, or like the political implications. But I just got to be honest with you. I started on my couch in tears last night. And I just personally want to, I'm not prescribing this for everyone, because I know my lived experience is very different, and my relationship with grief is unique to me in some ways. But like, I know that I need to practice grieving. I need to practice feeling this in my body. And as a white person who, is afforded more privileges and power in our society, I think there's lots of conditioning that would keep me from actually letting it land somewhere in me. So I just want to throw that out there too, that just practicing grief and lament, I think actually does help, is essential. It's an essential spiritual practice for me. And I think for us as the church together, to be able to move into action. And Jonny, it kind of puts your whole book and our whole interview that we already recorded in a whole, in context, tragically so, that we as Christians have to let our faith and our hope in Jesus and the kingdom of God, and our desire to reveal and to live into the kingdom of God, even now, has to have material consequence in this world.
Absolutely.
And so taking action politically to interrupt these patterns of militarism and violence and racism are really essential faith development, and just for the healing and wholeness of all of us, because we are all diseased from these powers.
My sadness gets eclipsed by rage. So and I get very angry at the systemic problem we have. Like, there's a lot of anger in me, I have to admit. Like, someone put those ideas in the Buffalo Killer's head. And we have politicians and leaders that propagated it for their own power. And cable news show hosts and radio show hosts and things like that, right? That's bad news. And giving access to weapons furthers that, And then even in Texas, did you know ICE was at the school?
Wow.
So, there are parents who are undocumented that have to go see if their kids are okay, and then also risk deportation. You know how I don't have any other... Laura, you can bleep this out, but that is highly f***ed up, right? That's
Wow.
like a convergence of evil.
They came to the school after the shooting?
I think they're generally just around. Yeah, and then people are wondering, is the gunman documented or not? And then it becomes like a weird immigrate. How many evil forces are just going to converge here? We don't even have the creativity to imagine solutions. So more law enforcement or deportation or all these other things that lead to different kinds of forms of death.
Instead of nurturing the humanity.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear, Jonny, I hear you on the anger. And Julie on the your call to consciously process our grief, instead of trying not to let it affect us. I confess I picked a fight yesterday with somebody.
Who'd you fight with?
No, I'm not going to say on this podcast. But
Okay,
it was
tell me
because
later.
I was so upset about this shooting, and instead of just letting myself sit down and cry or whatever I needed to do, Yeah, and I'm thinking back to Sunday after Buffalo, we prayed in the meeting and acknowledged this racialized loss of life, and it just felt like my words felt so inept. Like it just, I wondered if we should just stop the meeting right there, or just like sit with each other, like forget about the sermon and the music and just sit with each other and cry. So I don't know what's needed, but I hear both of your words to let ourselves feel it, because we do feel it, and allow that to move us to engagement.
And not stay alone with it. We can share both. A shared anger and a shared grief are both powerful human processes. I think that no, that's not the right word, but like, I think it is, they are essential parts of our humanity that Jesus is calling us into more fully, more deeply. And I think they're both essential to living into the fullness of life that is offered us in Christ, even here and now.
Can I offer one thing before we go? The Bible is full of people in difficult situations lamenting circumstances that they don't feel like they can affect a change in. And so what they do is pray to God. And there's nothing else to do. And in our prayers, we can pray in lamentation, in anger. We can pray for all sorts of things. You know, that emotional expression, and God isn't going to judge you for how you pray. You know, so you can say your feelings, and God is with you in them, you know. This is the beginning of Isaiah. Hear the Lord's word, you leaders of Sodom. Listen to God's teaching, poor people of Gomorrah. What should I think about all your sacrifice, says the Lord? I am fed up with entirely burned offerings made of rams and the fat of well-fed beasts. I don't want blood of bulls, lambs, or goats. When you come to appear before me, who asked this from you, this trampling of my temple's courts? Stop bringing worthless offerings. Your incense repulses me. New moon, Sabbath, and the calling of an assembly. I can't stand wickedness with celebration. I hate your new moons and your festivals. They become a burden that I'm tired of bearing. When you extend your hands, I'll hide my eyes from you, even when you pray for a long time. I won't listen. Your hands are stained with blood. Wash, be clean, remove your ugly deeds from my sight, and put an end to such evil. Learn to do good, seek justice, help the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. Isaiah is talking to Israel as they've abandoned God and been taken into Babylonian captivity. There's a way out for the United States. We worship different gods. Violence, money, white supremacy. So we can pray, I hope that we can pray too, like Isaiah. And you can find comfort in that people have been oppressed for a long time with no solution out, but only praying for God's liberation. I think we can hope for that together and also enact it together. I'm so glad you're listening to our podcast. Love being connected with you. We want to keep building community with you, so please talk back to us right back at Resist and Restore Podcast at circleofhope.net. Additionally, stay connected with us by subscribing to this podcast. Give it a high review wherever you listen, and then share it with people that you think would be blessed by it. We want people to connect to us and to know us who are looking for us. And you can go to circleofhope.church and you can share in our common fund too. There's a place you can give that'll help this podcast and help our whole church too. And while you're there, check out our cells and Sunday meetings. There's a lot of ways for you to connect to the whole movement of our church, and I'm glad you're listening right now. It's good to be connected to you.
So this is unusual for me to be on the flip side of things, but I get to interview you, Jonny Rashid.
Jonny Rashid getting interviewed by Julie Hoke.
You do all the interviewing around here, but I'm excited to interview you about your new book that recently came out, Jesus Takes a Side. You've done a bunch of these podcasts so far, haven't you?
I've been on a handful of podcasts so far, yeah.
Nice. It's about time we get you on ours. I just want to say thank you for writing this book.
Oh, wow.
I want to start there because, well, for a lot of reasons, but just the title alone brings up so many questions for me personally. And so I was eagerly awaiting this book, even though we've talked about it throughout this process. And I especially appreciated that the vulnerability you offer in writing this book. You start chapter 1 with the politics of my body, the value and the meaning that society has assigned to you as a brown man, and specifically naming the politics of Jesus because of how society saw his body. As a poor Palestinian Jewish rabbi, his body had public meaning in his context. And you set the stage for his whole ministry and this whole book right there, where it's located in you and in Jesus. Can you say a little bit about that for folks who have not read the book yet?
So for me, when politics became an existential matter for me, that's what I mean when I say a body. It's a part of my body, part of my existence. It changed the conversation from being abstract, which I have historically engaged in abstract political discourse. That's, in some ways, that's even safer for me. But it moved it from an abstract idea to something that was personal and material as a matter of my body. And it was when January 2017, it was the first thing the Trump administration did was this executive action to ban people from Muslim countries from coming into the United States, right? And he said he was going to do that, but it still was shocking, and it happened instantly, right? And then there was kids on the other side of gates not being able to get in. We had a love feast that day, and there were people stuck in O'Hare and stuck in PHL, by the way, so our airport too. And then people left our love feast to go protest right at the airport. And I really felt it in my body. I couldn't believe that this was happening, right? And then I was supposed to do communion, right? And I was like, I have to mention this. And I got emotional. And it's interesting because now I'm looking at my life now and I'm like, well, you cry all the time now. But back then I didn't.
I remember this moment. It was unusual, at least in my experience with you up front. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm usually not like that. And I needed Jesus to save me. It felt like I needed Jesus on I needed Jesus on my side. Right? On our side. So there was no compromise there for me, no possibility, So I needed to be saved. I needed Jesus to be on my side. So to me, that's what motivates Jesus taking a side. That's really what the heart of it was for me. That personal experience.
And that sets the stage for the whole book. And for this imagination, this prophetic imagination that you're calling us into, that Jesus is calling us into, what is possible in this world. Jesus' life and ministry had material consequence.
Absolutely.
Had immediate consequence. And I think you even talk about how Jesus' signs and wonders, his miracles, were a sign of that points to his lordship, right? It wasn't people followed him for his miracles, for his healing, but there was even more to him. They were signs of his lordship, but to reveal that, he met immediate needs.
That's right.
And you're saying in this book that our politics have a similar purpose, that how Christians act politically point to a savior who's leading us. Mm-hmm. And there needs to be tangible political outcome or evidence of who is leading us.
That's right.
Let me see if I can phrase this question. Okay. We just had elections in Pennsylvania, and we have a Republican gubernatorial candidate, Doug Mastriano, who represents this a resurgence or a movement of Christian nationalists. And he is saying God is on our side. He says we have the power of God with us. We have Jesus Christ that we're serving here. He's guiding and directing our steps. So he wants to see Christianity fused with American civil life. Mm-hmm. You are calling Christians into political action, into American civil life. Can you talk about the difference here? What's happening?
Yeah, this is a good question. A lot of people have wondered if you're engaging, if you want, because the book is about getting people to engage and make political commitments, especially Christians, right? And there are a lot of Christians who already have made political commitments. They just have made political commitments that are fascist. And I use that word plainly because it clearly describes what's happening, right? Mastriano is like a fascist, right? An insurrectionist type person who undermines our whole electoral process, thinks the election was stolen, right? And there is a real Christian movement to support that. The difference, in my opinion, between politics, the political engagement that I'm talking about and what Mastriano's talking about is, number one, the actually outcomes of our work. What's the result of it? What's going to happen? Because political commitments alone aren't important. What is motivating our political commitments, and then what is the outcome of them? For Christians who want to secure their place in our society, to secure their rights, and to make sure that the United States protects them, their politics is self-serving. And that is not what the gospel moves us to do, not to serve ourselves. God protects us, and we advocate for the least of these. That's what we do. We put ourselves on the line for the sake of the most vulnerable. We don't just seek to protect ourselves. Because, now I said I needed Jesus on my side to protect me from forces that were oppressing me. But there's a lot of areas in my life that I need Jesus to be on the side of those that I oppress. I'm a racial and sexual minority. And so those are areas of my life that I need special protection from God in, where the image of God is dishonored in me as a brown person, as a bisexual person, when I am oppressed. However, I do my own oppression as a cis male, as an educated person, as someone who is able-bodied as well. And so I don't need my politics to protect those parts of me. In fact, I need my politics to protect people from the way that I might oppress them. And so that's a difference in how we think. But I think it's important, and I don't talk too much about this in the book, but I think it's important to name that in the 20th century, theologians responded to the Holocaust in their theology by trying to figure out how this could never happen again. And the creeping fascism in the United States demands political opposition. We mustn't equate the two. It's really, but it is not convenient or very tenable in our political discourse to not do that. Because in the United States, we have a little bit of exceptionalism, so we're used to our bipartisan system just being good. There are no bad options. There are just options that we disagree about. But that has changed dramatically, I would say, and kind of flagrantly under Donald Trump. So now, honestly, before Trump, this book would have been a lot harder of a sell for many people. But after we saw explicit white nationalism, after we saw an insurrection on the Capitol, and just recently after we saw one of the largest hate crime massacres in the history of the country, we can see, oh, there's real lives on the line here. This is significant.
Yeah, so what about those of us who feel like maybe there's no good options? And, you acknowledge that politics is not going to save us save the world.
That's right.
So, what do you say to that? I mean, do we all have to be as engaged politically? You are very in it. You pay attention, you follow it. Politics is, it's not my thing. Anybody who knows me knows it's, I have to work to pay attention and even understand. I think there's a lot of intentionally confusing aspects of our politics, and what people say doesn't match up with what, there's just a lot to pay attention to even know how to engage. Do we all have to be super tuned in to be faithful to God?
Well, there's two questions there. So one, what about people who don't think there's any good options? I voted in every election twice a year, every year since I was 18. And there were never really great options for me. There were better options and worse options, but I wouldn't say any good options. In towards the end of the book, I talk about when Michael Bloomberg, rich oligarch billionaire, former New York mayor, he bought all these YouTube ads. This was like in like January, I think, of 2000, December or January. It was right before the primary season was going to begin.
Okay.
And before the pandemic actually started, right? Because I was at a party. It was probably one of the last parties I went to. And I wrote a blog post called You Don't Need to Vote. And that was not very popular at the time among my blue-minded friends. No, we gotta vote. Vote blue no matter who. That's what they said. You gotta get Trump out. And I was like, look, I'm not gonna change my soul for another billionaire oligarch. This is how the country works. I don't want to be a part of it. So my lack of voting is a political action unto itself. So I reserve the right not to vote, and I don't see it as a civic duty to vote or a Christian duty. I think that it's important for our elected officials to compel us to vote. But I also think an ideological stance in opposition to voting is as bad as one in favor of it. So usually we'll have a decent option. And so far in my life, that's been the case. But I'm willing not to participate if that's what it is. But we know that our politics are limited. We know it won't save us. And so Christians engage practically as much as we can, even though it's imperfect. And that's what Christian discipleship is often like. We do what we can with what we've got now to make an immediate change. Even as we await for Christ to return, even as we await for something new to happen, we still can act right now in the imperfection. We can still celebrate now, even in this liminal state that we're in. We can remember how God has liberated us in the past and await full liberation in the future. So Christianity then offers us transcendent hope and assures us imminent hope too. So in worship, we believe that God will save us. We believe in the faithfulness of God. But we also believe in the imminence of God. Jesus right now, alive among us in our bodies. We can do and act and change things now, even though there's limitations. So participate practically now, but don't forget about your prophetic imagination. Don't let the political constraints of our political spectrum of what's reasonable keep you from imagining what is possible. Like right now, ideas like defunding the police and abolition of police and prison abolition seem to be unrealistic politically. But that doesn't mean we should not strive for a world that doesn't have police brutality, that doesn't have violent law enforcement, a world where we can keep our communities safe in ways that aren't painful or hurtful or cause death. So it's important for us to hold both. But does that mean, to answer your second question, that we need to be very politically engaged? I would say no, for multiple reasons. One, you can rely on people who know more than you about what to do. I am not a policy expert whatsoever. I have friends that are, so I ask them, and I talk to them, and I listen to them. I don't need to understand it all. I don't even need to do my own research, you know? What the epidemiologists say about COVID-19 is good enough for me. You know, what my doctor says I should do is good enough for me. And similarly, develop those relationships with people that you trust, you know. Probably the area that I'm most interested in is local housing. And I serve on the Philadelphia Coalition for Affordable Communities Steering Committee. So this is a very specific issue. And in this last election, Julie, there was a ballot question about affirming the council's power to appoint people to the zoning board, right, the ZBA. It's a very specific question, you know.
And I texted you about it because it sounded really good. But I was like, I should find out what's going on behind this question.
Because I told people, vote no. Vote no. Vote against this, you know. And a lot of my friends were surprised. And I fielded a lot of questions about that. So find someone who knows something about the issues that you know less about. And then also, there are a lot of ways that we can stay aware and connected by listening to people around us, you know, as opposed to doing our own research. And a lot of it you don't need to know about, you know. It's hard to block out certain things. Like, I'm really surprised right now in my news feed. This is totally not related to the material, but can I just share this story?
Yep.
Like, I'm paying attention to the Southern Baptist abuse allegations. I'm paying attention to Roe v. Wade and the overturning of Roe v. Wade and how it affects women's reproductive rights and health all over the country. But then for some reason, like in my news feed, the main thing that I'm seeing is about like Johnny Depp and Amber Heard.
Oh my word.
So it's like, I don't like, do I have to follow this?
Yeah.
Like it's all, like, is it all over your stuff too?
Yes.
Like, why is this? Like, I don't even understand it. Why is this such a big story?
I don't know. I served on jury duty last week, and all of the jurors were sitting in the like waiting room talking about this trial. Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure either why it's garnering so much attention, but I mean, that does speak to the ways in which we direct our attention.
Yeah, it's hard to know what to pay attention to.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
So I would say focus on specific issues that you care about and then rely on other people that know more. That's important.
Mm-hmm. You talk about in the book how those of us who have more privilege and power in society, as Christians, we must interrogate what dominates our current consciousness, speaking of what we pay attention to, and the underlying assumptions that we take for granted. I kept coming back to reflecting on the way in which my whiteness and my like social position has informed or shaped my political awareness even.
Sure.
And that, I think, is really the heart of this book, is you're calling Christians to pay attention to this through the lens of Jesus. Can you talk about the challenge that it is for folks like myself who have more privilege and power, may not even be aware of the impact that our political engagement or lack thereof has on folks who are more marginalized in our society?
I mean, I think we're learning this together, but listen as closely as you can to those voices. Do your best to hear what they're saying. They're going to teach you something new about how to see the world, you know. I think in the book I say, you know, the market, neoliberalism, whiteness, and violence order our thinking, so we have to disrupt those orders, right? Disrupt that. I think listening to the most vulnerable helps us do that. Jesus shows us how to do that by relating to the most vulnerable. You know, Jesus has a whole different way of ordering things. This is, you know, in its ideal form, Anabaptism gives us an opportunity to question all the power structures of the world, you know, because we're imagining the kingdom of God in a whole new way, right? And how we share, how we see one another, how we're ordered. If we can hold on to that truth and not assume that we've arrived, then we can ask questions about what orders us now and how we want Jesus to order us. I was just on a call yesterday with Jesus Collective, and one of the Jesus Collective things that they say, and you taught me this, Julie, is they say we're Jesus-centered. And someone was like, well, what does it mean to be Jesus-centered? I said, well, to even know that, you have to find out what otherwise centers you. What keeps you centered? And how do you change that? How do you change who you're loyal to, who you claim as Lord? How do you figure that out? So I think that Jesus submits to the Father, and that means that you have to really interrogate the other lords, the other gods that you serve. And don't assume there aren't any. Don't assume you're okay. And keep listening to the most vulnerable.
Yeah, you give examples all throughout the book, both from Jesus and from Paul in particular, the Apostle Paul, that illuminate just how this framework is seen all throughout Scripture. How the gospel is about liberation for all, which is directed toward those who are marginalized, and then is the invitation, of course, is for everyone, because those with power have Jesus is calling us to lay it down in order to follow. And I think the Beatitudes kind of are the starting point that you say Jesus offers us. Can you start us there with the way to understand what the good news of the gospel is, what Jesus is doing here?
Well, I love the Beatitudes, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, because it tells us who Jesus is talking to. Sometimes we read them and and I think this is an okay way to read them, but we read them as kind of principles that we're supposed to follow. Like, we should be poor in spirit, we should be humble, etc., etc. That's true that we should be, but Jesus has already found people like that. Jesus has already found people that are vacant. When I say vacant, I mean empty, and they need to be filled, And so for those of us that have oppression in our life, we come to the table hungry, ready to be filled with good things, But if you're wealthy, if you're powerful, you come filled with lots of things, So the people that are receiving this Sermon on the Mount are poor, and they want to be comforted and blessed and nourished. Same with the feeding of the 5,000. They come, they're hungry, Jesus fills them, But if you come filled already, like the rich young ruler, you have to empty. You have to get rid of your stuff and then be filled. Come to Jesus empty. And it's hard to get rid of your stuff, Right before the words of institution in 1 Corinthians 11, Paul says, you Corinthians, some of you are rich and you come to the love feast, you come to the communion, and you eat all the food and get drunk before any of the workers of the field have come to the love feast to get anything. Don't you have food at home? Why did you come and take all the stuff? Why do you humiliate those who have nothing, he says. And then he offers them the communion meal. So that even that, there's a political implication to how we're reconciled. How the valleys are filled and the hills are lowered. What does it look like? So the Sermon on the Mount gives us an idea for who Jesus is talking about. But then consistently in the gospel, it's so apparent that Jesus is here for the oppressed. And he wants to build a movement where people can join him in changing the world. Rich and poor can all come. The rich have something to benefit by divesting, and the poor have something to gain by being filled.
You have a chapter in here that talks about the third way. Mm-hmm. Do you want to get into that?
Yeah. So, there is so much. When the book is published, it's done, right? There's so much I wish I would have talked about, but at the same time, we already had to cut 15,000 words out. So, I guess there's gonna have to be a part 2. But
give us a little of that. What else did you want to say?
Well, the third way on its own, Walter Wink has this idea about resisting fight or flight and finding a third way, and I think that's a novel approach. to conflict resolution at times. Martin Luther King also exercises the third way by being a nonviolent resistor. So he brings a new perspective that is nonviolent resistance compared to the violent resistance. But Martin Luther King was still seen as a rabble-rouser. Martin Luther King was still seen as a problem. It wasn't third way enough, right? It didn't appease people around him. It still infuriated them. And today, and I mean this, the new civil rights movements that we have right now are in the model of civil disobedience. They're in the model of nonviolent resistance. Black Lives Matter is following in the example of Martin Luther King. But we see Black Lives Matter as a side for which we should find a third way. There's two poles, and now there's a third. So the old third way was Martin Luther King's approach. Now that approach isn't a third way, and so we find another approach. This insistence on continuing to find a third way, when we have already come up with creative ways to act, is frustrating, and it showcases that the people who are saying we want a third way are actually taking a side themselves.
Or those who have not truly awakened to the oppression that we're complicit in.
Totally.
You name that in the book, and I appreciate that, because I think this idea of Jesus showing us a third way, he often didn't, he acted in surprising ways. He didn't
Totally.
Take the ways of the world as if that was his only means for revealing himself. Like, he revealed a whole new way. And you get to that towards the end of the book, this idea of the prophetic imagination. But you're still calling us to use politics. I think you say something about how engaging politically is a matter of practicality, not righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because sometimes you do say things that are unequivocally political statements and stances that sound very righteous.
So this is a little complicated, right? When I say engaging politically, we do it practically. That means I vote for the best candidate. I back the best policy. I know it's not perfect. I'm just trying to advance our cause a little bit. I'm just taking progress when I can. I feel very comfortable in that space myself. It doesn't need to be ideal. It doesn't need to be perfect. We're just doing the best we can with what we've got. But what informs my political action are a greater politics that's informed by God and by Jesus. So, love of neighbor, for example, informs my politics, right? And then I engage as practically as I can. If I wait for the perfect opportunity, if I don't participate because the system's imperfect, well then I'm going to allow unnecessary suffering to occur, and I can't let my cynicism get the best of me, So thinking of the least of these is really important. I reluctantly voted in 2008 for Barack Obama against John McCain. And I did so because he was the first black president and my neighbors were black, and that mattered to me. And yes, this was a practical choice to make. But the representation of having a black president was so significant to my neighbors that I was compelled to vote, and it felt even a little bit righteous for that reason. There's nothing like getting to see. I was working at a school that was 98%, 99% black, and the staff was basically all black too. And watching these teachers celebrate the inauguration of Barack Obama and the emotional response that they got that finally someone who looked like them was in this position, that felt really good. That was I was in reverence watching what this significant moment meant. No matter what his policies were or weren't, this moment mattered. And so I want people to be able to engage imperfectly, but then also see where the progress is, see where the hope is, see that, not to be eclipsed by cynicism. So if we can hold both of those things together, I think we're in pretty good shape.
Anything else, Jonny, that you want to get into this interview?
I want to talk a little bit more about the third way. And this is about Circle of Hope, too. I write about this. The most flagrant example of the danger and the harm that third way thinking can cause is when it comes to LGBT inclusion in the church. For a long time, third way was used as a language to describe people who weren't firmly affirming or firmly in opposition to LGBTQIA people. But I'm telling you, if you are not firmly for LGBTQIA people and their full dignity, you're against them. You know, I saw this New Yorker comic. I think it was the New Yorker. It was some political cartoon that said, "This is how centrists are. Off with some of his head." You know? So if that's what we're doing to LGBTQIA people, well, you're still hurting them. And we did that for a long time in Circle of Hope. I participated in that too. And I regret that because of the harm that I caused and also the harm I caused myself. We heard from our queer people, hey, they didn't say take a side necessarily, but they said, make your stance clear. Can we be here? Can we participate? Can we lead? Can we get married? Or not? And for a long time, we hesitated about that, and that caused harm. Mm-hmm. Even saying no at the outset would have been better than baiting and switching. Than kind of saying, like, make your yes a yes.
Ambiguity, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That ambiguity causes pain. And so we're at a place right now where our yes is very clearly a yes. And that's caused us a lot of trouble. And it will cause us a lot of trouble. But following Jesus means that, you know. If we're going to really be self-emptied, then we have to be willing to actually self-empty for the sake of the gospel and for the sake of the oppressed. So, to me, that's the most explicit example of the danger of the third way.
Thanks, Jonny. Thank you again for writing this book, for articulating these things, for all of the time and study and discernment that has gone into your writing. You write a lot for us, but I think this book comes at a moment that many of us need it, and it's timely. So thank you. I didn't say this at the beginning, but you're pretty clear you don't write this book for everyone. Do you want to say anything about that here at the end?
You could give this to like your uncle who watches like Tucker Carlson and listens to Sean Hannity every day. I don't think it'll move the needle very much with them. I'm not writing to convince people that have other political commitments to change those political commitments. For a couple of reasons. One, I don't think my word is more powerful than the people they listen to. Two, I think there's enough of us that are convicted politically but don't know how to act that we can actually make a change. There's enough people who don't participate at all because they're apathetic or cynical, and there are people who are hesitant to participate despite their conviction. If that book is for those people, you know. But if you feel satisfied with your political choices, this probably isn't for you. And I don't need it to be for everybody. You know, I'm looking for people who are looking for this. And if you feel hesitant to engage politically, I hope my book encourages you to engage politically for the sake of the oppressed. But if you're comfortable in your politics, you know, if Mastriano's your boy and that's what you want to do, fine. You know, what we're going to do is get a group of people to oppose you and change the world that way. And you're welcome to join us, you know, but I'm going to focus on liberating the oppressed and finding people who want to do that.
Okay, Jonny, for those who want to read this book now, where can they get it? And is there a party they can participate in?
A party's a good idea. You can get it anywhere where books are sold. And if you get it and you like it, write a review. I'd love that. If you buy it from Amazon and write a review on Amazon, that like works together pretty well for some reason. And then on June 18th at 4 o'clock at Frankfurt Ave, 2007 Frankfurt Ave, we're going to have a cover show. Another podcast recording with color correction. Andrew and Bethany are going to interview me. That'll be fun. And then There's this old band called MXPX that's like a Christian punk rock band from the 90s that I really like. And my two best friends from high school are going to play a cover show. So that's going to be really fun. It really is just to have a good time together. So I hope you can come. You got to be vaccinated to come so that we're all safe. But I hope to see you there.
Launch party on June 18th.
That's right.
Thanks, Jonny. And if people want to follow you, you do lots of other writing. Where can they find you?
JonnyRashid.com is the website that I use to blog. You can find me at Jonny Rashid on Twitter and Instagram if you want to follow the food that I make, which is an interest of mine. Food Pastor is how you do that. And of course, this podcast is a good way to do it too. So I hope that you can support Resist and Restore as well. Those are some possibilities, yeah.
Great. Thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, take it easy.
Okay, friends, we like to close our show with a little discussion on what's been nourishing our soul. This is important because we need the nourishment and beauty from each other, from God, that's all around us in the world. Our daily prayer writer right now, who's on this show, is writing about plants this week and just calling us to more of that nourishment for us in creation. And that's always a big one for me. But pastors, what's been nourishing your soul? What encouragement can you offer just from your own personal experience this past week?
So something really exciting happened to me. I got the shipment of Jesus, the author copies of Jesus Takes a Side. So I had the books, and I had this moment where I like used a box cutter to open them up, and it was just special to see the work pay off and actually hold something that I made. That was fun to me, and it nourished my soul just seeing it happen. I've never experienced something like that before, so it was special and meaningful to me. So that felt good, and I want to hold the goodness of it, and I want to be able to be present to the celebration. And to be honest with you, like, my instinct is to draft the table of contents for like a new book and not sit in the present moment with this one, because I'm so on to the next thing. Like, literally, when Herald Press gave me the contract, the offer, it wasn't even the contract, it was just the offer to write Jesus Takes a Side. I have to admit, what my first thought was, this is terrible. My first thought was, I wonder what my second book should be about. Like, it was so instant to the next, like, that's so, like, what nourishes my soul is actually being present to the moment and actually holding the good thing. So I'm trying to do that.
Well, similarly, something that's been nourishing my soul is being present to the people around me through shared meals. I was just feeling so grateful this week for a couple different instances where I got to share a meal with people, with groups of people. We were gathering, and I don't want to take that for granted. After 2 years in a pandemic, it is no small thing to be able to be enjoying this beautiful spring weather outside, sharing good food, and like all the little things that happen through the hospitality of others and the connection in the space that you make when you get together to share a meal was nourishing to me.
Beautiful and delicious.
Yeah, had some good ribs.
Cookout season is coming. Maybe there will be more opportunity for that. My soul has been nourished recently by catching up on the last couple of decades of movies. I'm not so good at keeping up with them when they come out, but I realized recently that there's like a handful of movies with biblical themes, especially liberation themes, that I've missed. And so recently I've been watching them, starting with Risen, and then the Exodus story with Christian Bale, And then last night I just watched Ben-Hur with Morgan Freeman. Came out in 2016. And I loved that story as a kid, and it's pretty well done. Anyway, it's been encouraging to see how God responds, like we were talking in the beginning, to see how God responds to those who cry out to God, like those in impossible situations throughout the centuries, those with their backs against the wall, as Howard Thurman says. How I've been encouraged to see how God has shown up in the past, and how we might call on God to show up for us now, to bring justice, to meet us in our struggle now. So glad for Hollywood making these movies of true stories that are also in the Bible, but it's fun to see them on screen. Anything else you want to add, pastors?
That's it.
Talk back to us, seriously. Resist and Restore Podcast. If you got to this part of the show, Resist and Restore Podcast at circleofhope.net. Email us back. We want to talk to you.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you. Hope to hear from you soon.